The late afternoon sun sank low behind the downtown skyline, casting long shadows across the rain-slick pavement. A light drizzle had passed hours before, but the city still wore its aftermath like a faded memory puddles collecting along the curb, the air cool and metallic, like the scent of forgotten coins. Inside, a narrow café tucked between a bookstore and a pharmacy, warmth flickered behind fogged glass. The place was cramped, buzzing, alive in the way only city cafés can be. Every table occupied, every stool taken, voices layered over one another like overlapping melodies. The hiss of steaming milk, the chime of a front bell, the rhythmic thump of shoes on wet tile. At a tiny corner table, near the back where the windows fogged the most, June sat quietly. She was 24, maybe 25, though life had painted worry lines on her a few years too early. Her coat was a thrift store, olive green, 2 buttons missing, sleeves frayed, her hair tucked loosely into a messy bun, curled with the humidity. She stirred a lukewarm tea with the end of a paper straw, notebook open in front of her. The pages were filled with scribbled lines, half-finished poems, budget notes, job leads she hadn't followed up on. She stared out the window, pretending to read, the same way you pretend to be busy when you're waiting for something you can't name. She didn't come here for the tea. She came for the warmth, the noise that masked silence, and the illusion that maybe she wasn't as alone as she sometimes felt. Rent was overdue. Again, her roommate had moved out 2 weeks ago without notice, taking the last of the deposit and the Wi-Fi password. The job she'd applied to hadn't called back. Again, she'd been eating saltines for dinner, rationing peanut butter with the precision of a chemist. But none of that showed on her face, not quite. She'd become an expert at quiet endurance. Then, the door chimed. He walked in like he didn't quite belong, not because of how he looked, but because of the way the air shifted. He was tall, soaked from the rain, a dark hoodie pulled over a button-down that clung to his shoulders. Behind him was a little boy, maybe 6 or 7. The child clung to his father's coat like a shadow, small fingers twisted in fabric, eyes wide and scanning. There was something about the boy's posture, nervous, unsure, like noise was too loud and lights too bright. The man approached the counter, speaking softly. Is there anywhere he could sit? His voice was polite, careful. He's not good with crowds, it's sensory stuff. The barista, her ponytail frizzing under the humidity, offered a sympathetic frown. I'm sorry, we're packed. You can wait, but it might be a while. The boy's fingers tightened on the coat. His eyes shimmered. He wasn't crying, not yet, but June knew that look. The look before the storm. She closed her notebook. Her chair scraped quietly against the tile as she stood and waved. You can sit here, she said, gently, as if the words might scare them away. I don't mind. The man turned. Surprise flickered across his face. Are you sure? She nodded. Absolutely. He looks like he needs a quiet corner. He hesitated, then offered a nod and guided his son over. The boy sat gingerly, shrinking into the booth as if trying not to touch anything. His small fingers still clung to the hem of his dad's sleeve. June smiled softly. I have something, she said, reaching into her worn canvas bag. She pulled out a deck of worn cards, not for playing, but for coloring. They were hand-drawn, animal shapes she used when babysitting. She laid them on the table like a quiet peace offering. Pick your favorite, she said, and you can color it. The boy looked at her, unsure. Then he looked at his dad, who gave a tiny nod. After a moment, the boy reached out, touching a card with a drawing of a fox curled into itself. Good choice, June whispered. She handed him a small pencil case filled with stubby crayons, barely longer than her thumb. My name's June. The boy didn't answer, but he started coloring. The man sat down opposite her. I'm Eli, he said. That's Miles. June nodded. Nice to meet you both. Eli's eyes were tired, exhausted. Really, but soft, kind. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in years but still tried to make pancakes every morning. They didn't talk for a while, just sat, letting the sound of the café swirl around them like a storm they were watching from behind glass. Eventually, a woman at the next table leaned over, her voice sharp. Letting strangers sit with you now. Her tone was half joking, half judging. June didn't flinch. Some people don't need space, they need grace. The woman blinked, turned away. Eli let out a breath, almost a laugh. You're braver than I am. June sipped her tea, now cold, not brave, just ... Tired of watching people suffer alone. Miles colored quietly beside them. His shoulders had relaxed. He was humming now, almost soundlessly, pressing red crayon into the fox's tail. They stayed like that for a while. Miles coloring, Eli watching him, June pretending not to watch both of them. When it was time to go, Miles gathered the cards carefully, tucking them into the front pocket of his tiny backpack. Eli stood and looked at June. Thank you, he said. You didn't have to do that. Neither did you, she replied. He hesitated, then reached into his coat. I don't usually do this, he said, offering a card. It was black, embossed, minimal, just a name, no number, no logo. If you ever need a cup of coffee, I owe you. June looked at the card. Just his name, Eli D. West. Nothing else. It felt like a puzzle piece that didn't come with a picture. She watched them leave, Miles waving once over his shoulder, the Fox card peeking out of his bag like a secret. For a few moments, the table felt emptier than it should have. That night, back in her studio apartment, June sat cross-legged on her mattress. The place was barely more than a room, a hot plate, a narrow window, a lamp that flickered if she moved too fast. She had $12 to her name, and yet, something about the encounter had left her strangely full, like the universe had nodded at her and said, "Yes, keep going." She pulled the card from her pocket again. Eli D. West. The name echoed somewhere. She pulled out her old laptop, the one that wheezed when it loaded, and typed the name into a search bar. There were dozens of articles, profiles, headlines. Eli West, founder of West and Marlowe Ventures, a private equity firm known for funding nonprofits, focused on childhood a millionaire, maybe more. She sat back in shock. He hadn't said a word, no arrogance, no hint of wealth, just a man trying to calm a frightened child. She blinked, closed the laptop, and tried to sleep. The week passed slowly. She got a call from a temp agency, one shift, unloading boxes. It paid just enough to keep the lights on. But even as she hauled crates and counted inventory, her mind wandered back to the boy and the man with kind eyes and no title. Then, on a Friday morning, her phone buzzed. No name, no subject. The message read, "Stop by the 8th Street Gallery at noon. Ask for the curator. Tell them you know Miles." That was all. At 11:58, June stood outside a building she'd never dared to enter. The windows gleamed. Inside, light spilled onto white walls like water, the kind of place where people wore cashmere and spoke in soft, decisive tones. She almost didn't go in, but then she did. The curator greeted her like she was expected. She was led down a hallway into a room filled with art, and in the center of the room, her drawings. The fox, the owl, the bear cub with 2 large paws, all hers, framed, mounted, lit like masterpieces. She turned and there he was. Eli this time. He wore a blazer, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His posture was still gentle, still quietly tired. She stared at him, stunned. "You kept them," she said. "I did. You, you're him." The Eli West, still just Eli, he said, with a small smile. She didn't speak. He gestured around the room. "You gave my son something, rare comfort. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care. You gave him crayons." She nodded, still too stunned to speak. "I want to sponsor you," he said. "No conditions, just your work. On your terms." She blinked. "Why?" "Because kindness should be seen," he said, "and your art holds that." He handed her a thin folder, a contract, a gallery showing, a stipend, enough to create without fear. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Say yes," he whispered. She did. The months that followed were a blur of color and light, late nights and early mornings. She painted with everything she had. Animals, children, dreams caught in pencil and ink. Her small apartment became a forest of canvases, creatures in mid-motion. Eli stopped by sometimes, quiet visits, a pastry, a coffee, a question about foxes. And Miles began to draw again. They'd come on Saturdays, bring art supplies and sit on the floor. He called her Junebug, and it stuck. The exhibit came quickly. The gallery buzzed with guests, whispers, wine glasses clinking. But June didn't care about that. She cared about the little boy in the front row, pointing proudly to a picture of a curled fox. She cared about the man in the corner who smiled, with his eyes, not his wallet. That night, as the gallery lights dimmed and the last guests filed out, Miles tugged her sleeve. "I made something," he said. He handed her a folded paper. Inside, in crayon, a family of animals: fox, bear, owl. Underneath, a heart. Inside the heart, he had written, "Us." June looked at Eli. He stepped forward, quietly, his voice soft. "Sometimes family finds you." She nodded, tears stinging. "Sometimes, it starts with a crayon." And in that moment, the girl who once rationed peanut butter and gave away her table realized that sometimes, kindness doesn't just come back. Sometimes, it builds a home. The rain came that night, not in torrents, not with thunder or warning, but as a gentle hush over the city, like the sky had been holding something in all day and had finally allowed itself to let go. Drops tapped softly on June's window as she sat curled on her worn love-seat, arms wrapped around her knees, heart too full to sleep. Beside her, the paper Miles had given her was propped gently against the wall. The little fox, the little owl, the little bear, the word "us," cradled. Inside a crayon-drawn heart, she traced the outline with her eyes again and again, not because she hadn't memorized it already, but because she couldn't quite believe it was real. It was strange, how quietly a life could change, not with sirens or fanfare, but with small things. A chair offered, a crayon shared, a child's hum in a crowded room, a name on a card with no number. Kindness, June thought, was rarely loud. It whispered, it waited, and if you listened closely, it wrote entire stories into the silence. Saturday came with sunlight and the smell of cinnamon. Eli and Miles arrived just after 10. Carrying a brown paper bag filled with pastries from a bakery June had never dared to enter before. "We decided you deserve sugar," Eli said, placing it down with exaggerated formality. June smiled. "Royal treatment, huh?" Miles nodded, seriously. "Because you're important." She knelt down to eye level. "You know what, so are you." The rest of the morning passed in laughter and brushstrokes. They painted animals with party hats. They made a paper zoo. June let Miles paint a rainbow fox on her cheek and didn't even blink when he added glitter. Eli watched from the kitchen table, sipping his coffee slowly, as if the moment itself needed to be savored. Later that afternoon, when Miles had curled up on the couch for a nap, fingers still stained with paint, June stood beside Eli at the window. The street below was bathed in soft gold, the kind of light that only lasts for 5 minutes and makes everything look like memory. "Do you ever feel like you're standing inside someone else's life?" she asked quietly. Eli didn't look away. "All the time." She took a breath. "I used to think none of this was meant for me. Stability, peace, love, like those were things other people got." His voice was gentle. "And now, I'm scared it'll disappear." Eli turned to her. "Fully this time, it won't." "You can't promise that." "No," he said, "but I can promise this. If it ever does, we'll find it again." Together, the word hung there between them together. Fragile, solid, and slowly, without meaning to, she leaned into him. Not out of need, but out of quiet recognition. Their foreheads touched, and for a long time, there were no words, just breath, and heartbeat, and the sense that sometimes, home wasn't a place, it was a person. Weeks passed. June's name appeared in a local paper. The illustrator who colored her way into the city's heart. There was a photo, too, of her standing in front of a large canvas, arms crossed, hair pulled back, paint smudged across her chin like a badge of honor. She didn't recognize herself at first, and then she did. She'd become someone who smiled without apology. She taught her first art class at a community center 3 blocks from her old building. 10 kids. Paper butterflies. Laughter that echoed off linoleum floors. Eli was there when she opened the doors. Miles sat in the front row, crayons in hand, already drawing animals no one had ever seen before. After class, one little girl tugged on June's sweater. "Miss June," she asked, "how do you know what to draw when everything feels sad?" June knelt beside her, thought for a moment. "I draw what I want to believe in," she said, "even if I can't feel it yet." The girl smiled and drew a purple bear with wings. And June knew she would never stop doing this. Not for galleries, not for recognition, but for the kids who had been told they were too loud, too soft, too much, too broken. For the kids like Miles. For the girl she once was. One afternoon, as summer spilled into the edges of spring, they visited the cafe again. The same one. Same foggy windows. The same table in the back. Only this time, June didn't sit alone. Miles sat beside her, giggling as he drew a turtle in a spacesuit. Eli sat across, a book in his hand, glancing up every few pages just to smile. The barista knew, probably over to clear a table, and paused. "I love your work," she said, eyes wide. "The fox drawings." June blinked. "Thank you." The girl hesitated. "You probably hear that all the time. Not the way you just said it." The girl beamed. "Well, they make me feel like my only one who sees the world weird." "You're not," June said. The girl walked away, smiling. Eli leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You do know," he said, "you're changing the world." She shook her head. "I'm just drawing animals." "No," he said, softly, "you're showing people they matter." And that night, when the stars came out and the city hummed with late buses and open windows and music floating from rooftops, June lay in bed beside Miles. He'd asked to have a sleepover in her art cave. She brushed a curl from his forehead and watched his chest rise and fall. In the quiet, Eli stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded. "More than okay." He stepped into the room, knelt beside her. "I've been carrying something," he said. For a while, she turned to him, heart steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, not elaborate, not flashy, simple, gold, a small sapphire, the same color Miles used for his foxes. He didn't say anything at first. He just held it out, eyes steady, voice quiet. "Not for show, not because it's expected, but because I can't imagine a life where you're not part of our story." June didn't cry. Not immediately. She smiled, then nodded, then whispered, "Yes." Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Later, after Miles had fallen deeper into sleep, after the lights had dimmed and the city had hushed, June sat by her desk with her sketchbook open. She began to draw not a fox, or a bear, or even a butterfly, but a small house, a window glowing, 2 figures standing in the light, a child laughing between them, and underneath. In her slow, careful script, she wrote, "The table where it all began." Because sometimes, a moment of kindness becomes a forever. And sometimes, a seat offered in a crowded café writes the first chapter of a story no one ever saw coming. If this story moved your heart, if you've ever felt unseen, or wondered if kindness still exists in this world, know that it does. Sometimes it just starts quietly with a shared table, a borrowed crayon, a whispered yes. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more moments like these, because in a world of noise, we believe in the quiet things that matter, the stories that heal, the people who stay, and the art that never truly dries.